The recent catastrophic explosion at Cape Canaveral did more than just destroy a rocket and a launch pad. It exposed a critical vulnerability in America's ambitious return to the moon and its race against emerging space powers. Around 9 p.m. Eastern Time on Thursday, May 28th, the Florida coast ignited with a brilliance akin to a second sunrise. Cameras at Cape Canaveral were already recording, and live-stream chat rooms buzzed with anticipation as a nearly 98-meter machine, the New Glenn rocket, sat poised on its launch pad, awaiting the roar of 7 of the most powerful methane engines ever constructed. But what was meant to be a routine test quickly turned into a disaster. The rocket is gone, the pad is gone, and the full implications of this event are something Blue Origin is not yet ready to discuss. This incident was intended to be a hot fire test, a standard pre-flight procedure where engines ignite for a few seconds, while the rocket remains securely bolted to the ground. Data from such tests is meticulously reviewed, and if all parameters are nominal, a launch typically follows the next week. New Glenn's fourth mission, designated NG-4, was slated for June 4th, just 7 days later. Its payload, a stack of 48 Amazon Kuiper satellites, the initial delivery in a multi-billion-dollar contract, lay ready in a clean room across Florida. Jeff Bezos was poised for delivery, but his rocket had other plans. What official press releases largely omitted was the gravity of the loss. Launch Complex 36 was not merely a launch pad, it was Blue Origin's sole orbital launch pad. There was no backup, no secondary site, just this one. Blue Origin invested over $1 billion to reconstruct it from the ground up, completing the work in 2021. This marked the first entirely rebuilt launch complex at Cape Canaveral since the 1960s. The original LC-36, established in 1962 for the Atlas Centaur, had hosted 148 launches over 6 decades. Blue Origin subsequently raised the old structures, erecting a single, massive new pad, specifically engineered for the immense size and weight of the New Glenn. A facility of its kind, it is unparalleled in the nation. The 57-meter first stage, fully loaded with liquid oxygen and methane, ignited at its base. As the upper stage above it began to tilt and fall, the entire rocket stack was engulfed. The colossal transporter erector, the towering scaffold responsible for holding the rocket upright and moving it from the hangar to the pad, stood directly adjacent to the New Glenn, and it too was obliterated. At least one of the lightning protection towers, the robust steel masts that stand like sentinels around the pad, was vaporized. By Friday morning, Blue Origin issued warnings to Florida beachgoers about potential debris washing ashore in the days ahead, a testament to the sheer scale of the blast. Rocket fragments continued to fall, and homes in Cape Canaveral and Cocoa Beach were rocked by the explosion. Residents watching television reported feeling the ground tremble beneath them, while the internet quickly filled with images of an eerie orange glow illuminating the coast for many kilometers inland. This incident draws stark comparisons to a previous catastrophe at the Cape, the September 2016 SpaceX Vulcan 9 explosion on Pad 40. That event, caused by a fueling anomaly, resulted in a fiery destruction of the rocket and an expensive Israeli communications satellite. The Vulcan 9 fleet was grounded for 3.5 months, and the pad remained out of commission for over a year. However, SpaceX had alternatives. They shifted launches to Pad 39A at the Kennedy Space Center and utilized Vandenberg in California, ensuring their operations continued. Blue Origin, crucially, possesses no such options. Until LC-36 is rebuilt, every New Glenn rocket, both existing and under construction, has no launch site. This raises critical questions about the timeline, and this is where the implications become particularly unsettling. Amazon now finds itself in significant jeopardy. Their ambitious satellite internet business, Project Kuiper, designed to rival Starlink, hinges on rapidly deploying satellites into orbit. SpaceX already boasts over 7,600 Starlinks, serving more than 10 million subscribers. Amazon, however, has between 210 and 241 satellites in orbit, depending on the week of counting. The Federal Communications Commission, FCC, which grants the licenses essential for satellite operations, mandates Amazon to deploy 1,618 satellites by July 30th, 2026. This deadline, just 2 months from the explosion date, is fast approaching. While Amazon has applied for a 2-year extension, the underlying challenge remains immense. The 24 launches Amazon contracted with Blue Origin were the cornerstone of their deployment strategy. NG-4 was meant to be the first. Now, there is no launch one. Fortunately, the initial 48 satellites were not on board during the test, a small silver lining in an otherwise grim situation. The remaining 23 contracted launches are now in limbo, awaiting a launch pad that no longer exists, while the regulatory deadline looms unforgivingly. Imagine being at the helm of one of the world's largest corporations. You've committed to establishing a global satellite network to compete with Starlink, investing $10 billion in the endeavor. Your primary reliance for orbiting these satellites is a rocket manufactured by a company owned by the very founder of your own enterprise. You dedicate years to coordinating launch manifests, constructing factories, and training ground teams. Then, one evening, while at home in Seattle, your phone illuminates with a live stream from Florida, a colossal explosion, your most crucial launch partner's sole pad engulfed in flames. That was Andy Jassy's Thursday night. Beyond satellites, an even more critical domain is affected: humanity's return to the moon. Just 2 days prior to the explosion, on May 26th and 27th, NASA unveiled nearly $1 billion in contracts for its ambitious lunar base program. Tucked within that announcement was a familiar name: Blue Origin. The company secured an initial award of $188 million, with an option for an additional $280 million for the delivery of 2 lunar terrain vehicles to the moon's south pole. These rovers are destined to traverse the pristine lunar dust where Apollo never ventured, their wheels set to imprint the first American tracks on the lunar surface in over 5 decades. Blue Origin won this pivotal contract. However, the lander designed to transport these rovers, the Blue Moon Mark 1, lacks an independent means of reaching the moon. It relies entirely on a New Glenn rocket, the very same type of rocket now strewn in fragments across Cape Canaveral. On Friday morning, the NASA administrator issued a carefully worded statement acknowledging an anomaly and affirming the agency's commitment to supporting a thorough investigation with its partners. He concluded by stating that spaceflight is unforgiving. What he did not explicitly state, however, speaks volumes. The Artemis 3 low Earth orbit demonstration of Blue Moon, scheduled for mid-2027, is contingent on New Glenn. He did not mention that the Moonbase 1 mission, targeted for this autumn, also relies on New Glenn. Nor did he articulate that Artemis 4, the mission poised to return astronauts to the lunar surface in 2028, depends on Blue Moon for its landing. He didn't need to spell out that the entire framework for America's return to the moon is interconnected. The implications are starkly evident. Yet another significant concern emerges from the smoke: the BE-4 engine. 7 of these engines power the New Glenn first stage, each generating approximately 2,847 kilonewtons of thrust at sea level. They combust liquid methane, chemically identical to natural gas, combined with liquid oxygen in an oxygen-rich staged combustion cycle. These engines are potent, intricate, and relatively novel. Crucially, they also propel United Launch Alliance's Vulcan Centaur rocket, with 2 engines per Vulcan, sharing the same hardware, design, and supplier. The BE-4's development history is fraught with challenges. Announced in 2014, it didn't achieve flight until 2024, plagued by persistent problems and delays. On June 30, 2023, a BE-4 engine exploded 10 seconds into a test, causing significant damage to the test stand. Blue Origin conducted an investigation, implemented modifications, and eventually qualified the engine for flight. The inaugural Vulcan launch in January 2024 was successful, as was New Glenn's maiden flight a year later. While these engines have proven capable in flight, they have also previously exploded on the ground during the exact type of test that just occurred at LC-36. If the investigation concludes that a BE-4 engine failed that Thursday night, the Vulcan program faces an equally grave predicament. Vulcan carries vital national security payloads for the Department of Defense, launching Space Force satellites, spy satellites, and missile warning systems, assets the United States cannot afford to delay. A grounding of the BE-4 would ripple far beyond Blue Origin, imperiling America's primary heavy-lift launch capabilities across the board. Spaceflight Now, the leading publication covering the launch industry, posed this very question within hours of the explosion. As of now, the investigation has not attributed blame to the engines, nor to any other specific cause. The root cause is still being meticulously reconstructed from telemetry data and the molten remnants of the launch pad. However, every hour that passes without a definitive answer keeps the worst-case scenario firmly on the table. This recent incident was not the first cautionary sign. Blue Origin's third New Glenn flight, on April 19th, resulted in a stranded satellite. The mission, named Bluebird 7, carried a satellite for AST Spacemobile, a company developing space-based cellular towers designed to beam mobile service directly to phones from orbit. This satellite was costly, ambitious, and irreplaceable. While the first stage performed flawlessly, even returning to land on a drone ship in the Atlantic, a crucial capability Blue Origin needed to demonstrate for cost competitiveness against SpaceX. The upper stage, responsible for orbital insertion, failed. A cryogenic leak occurred, with liquid oxygen, far colder than any natural substance, escaping where it shouldn't have, freezing a hydraulic line solid. This prevented the engine from gimbaling correctly, misdirecting its thrust. Consequently, the satellite was released into an unintended orbit, rendering it incapable of fulfilling its designed purpose. The FAA subsequently grounded the rocket, mandated an investigation, identified 9 corrective actions, and only recertified New Glenn for flight on May 27th. Consider the critical timing. The FAA released its final report on the April mishap on May 27th, officially clearing New Glenn for return to flight. Less than 36 hours later, the rocket was engulfed in flames on the pad. Interestingly, the FAA is not investigating this particular incident, as static fire tests fall outside the scope of FAA-licensed activities, and air traffic was not impacted. That is the official stance. What they won't explicitly state, however, is that the agency had just cleared a rocket whose engines, as a complete stack on the pad, had not yet undergone this specific test. Now, the outcome of that test has delivered a definitive, albeit catastrophic, answer. The precise cause of the failure remains unknown, whether it was an engine, a propellant system, a valve, a software glitch, a structural issue with the pad infrastructure, or a combination thereof. A conclusive answer may take months. Blue Origin will conduct the investigation and pinpoint the root cause. Until that investigation is complete and the cause publicly identified, the launch pad cannot be cleared for further operations. In a best-case scenario, drawing parallels with SpaceX's 2016 incident, LC-36 could be out of commission for at least a year before it can host another rocket. The worst case could be significantly longer. During this period, New Glenn would need an alternative launch solution. The critical problem is, there is no other way, there is only LC-36. To put this into perspective, Blue Origin had projected 8 to 12 New Glenn launches in 2026. For the same year, SpaceX has between 140 and 145 launches planned. This disparity was already immense before Thursday night, and it has now widened by, conservatively, every single Blue Origin launch remaining on the calendar. Blue Origin is currently valued at approximately $100 billion. SpaceX, by contrast, is preparing for a public offering with a valuation estimated between $1.75 trillion and $2 trillion. The market is an unsentimental entity. It will not patiently await the reconstruction of LC-36. A single New Glenn launch is estimated to cost between $68 million and $110 million, depending on development cost allocation. The entire program has already cost Blue Origin at least $2.5 billion to reach this stage. On Thursday night, in approximately 30 seconds, a substantial portion of that investment vanished. Not just the rocket, but the pad it occupied, the surrounding infrastructure, the allocated launch slot, customer confidence, and critical momentum, all dissipated in an explosion lasting less than a minute. Jeff Bezos issued a brief statement on Friday morning. All personnel are accounted for and safe. It's too early to know the root cause, but we're already working to find it. Very rough day, but we'll rebuild whatever needs rebuilding and get back to flying. It's worth it. It was a calm, composed statement, indicative of deep reflection before its release. Elon Musk's response was a terse, 7-word remark. Most unfortunate. Rockets are hard. While undeniably true, it was also the observation of a man who witnessed his primary competitor lose its sole launch pad on national television, encapsulated in a statement whose brevity carries immense weight. What remains particularly striking is the sheer scale of the event. The fireball that illuminated Florida on Thursday night was bright enough to be seen from highways many kilometers inland. Residents in nearby homes reported feeling the ground shake, and the shockwave rattled windows in Cocoa Beach. By the time the smoke dispersed, the rocket was gone, the pad was gone, the transporter erector was gone, and the lightning towers were gone. Hardware that required years to assemble vaporized in mere seconds. The repercussions of that blast will continue to unfold for a year or more. To truly grasp the magnitude of a rocket explosion at close range, a fully fueled New Glenn first stage contains hundreds of thousands of liters of liquid methane and liquid oxygen. When this mixture ignites instantaneously, the released chemical energy is sufficient to vaporize anything within hundreds of meters. NASA, the FAA, and the Space Force have extensively studied the explosion radius for methane and oxygen propellants of this scale, always mindful that vehicles like New Glenn, Starship, and Vulcan utilize the same combination, meaning an accident on one pad could potentially damage adjacent facilities. Had you been standing 6 kilometers away that Thursday night, the heat would have felt like an oven door violently swinging open. Had you been on the pad itself, there would have been nothing left to recover. Such was the immense chemical fury contained within that machine, the very energy intended to propel them into orbit just 1 week later. So, what happens now? Blue Origin will rebuild. Jeff Bezos possesses the necessary financial resources, and he has explicitly stated his commitment. The pad will be reconstructed, the investigation will identify a root cause, and engineers will redesign and requalify whatever is necessary. At some point, in some month of some year, a New Glenn will roll out to LC-36 and attempt this once more. This is the inherent nature of spaceflight. You fail, you analyze, you fix, you fly. It is the only path forward, and Blue Origin will pursue it, for they have no other choice. However, a broader context exists that no one at the company will openly articulate. The launch industry has consolidated significantly. The United States now effectively relies on just 2 primary heavy-lift launch providers, SpaceX and Blue Origin. The Department of Defense, NASA, Amazon, and every commercial satellite operator requiring orbital access are all dependent on one of these 2 entities. When one of them loses its sole launch pad during what should have been a routine test, the entire American launch architecture is destabilized. Vulcan Centaur relies on the same engines. Artemis relies on Blue Moon, which in turn relies on New Glenn. Amazon's Kuiper depends on New Glenn. National security demands robust options that are not prone to simultaneous collapse. Thursday night's incident cost more than just a rocket. The explosion starkly revealed the alarming lack of redundancy and how much rests upon so few machines. Consider this critical timeline. The first crewed mission of Artemis was initially slated to return humans to the moon by 2024, then shifted to 2025, then 2026. The current target is 2028. Every single one of these delays occurred before Thursday night. Now, imagine the immense pressure on that 2028 deadline, when one of the program's primary contractors is forced to rebuild from the ground up. This is a topic no one at NASA will want to discuss publicly right now. Meanwhile, the Chinese space program has announced a target date of 2030 for their crewed lunar mission. They have consistently met their previous milestones on schedule. Their Tiangong space station is fully constructed and crewed. They have successfully landed on the far side of the moon, an achievement the United States has yet to accomplish. China possesses a functional lunar lander program, the Longyue spacecraft, and has already tested its engines. China operates independently, requiring no American hardware, engines, or launch pads. They design and build their own, launching from their own facilities at Wenchang and Zhuchuan. Their timeline is entirely self-reliant, and their infrastructure is not currently engulfed in smoke on a Florida beach. The race back to the moon was already intensely competitive before Thursday night. Now, envision someone in Beijing on Friday morning, watching the explosion video on a screen and contemplating a single question. How long will it take for America to recover to where they expected to be next month? For those who analyze this industry, the candid answer is likely somewhere between several months and several years. Every day LC-36 remains inactive is a day the gap narrows. Therefore, as you observe the official statements released over the coming weeks, remember the true underlying narrative. You will hear Blue Origin pledge to rebuild. You will see Jeff Bezos post composed updates. NASA will promise thorough investigations, and the FAA will explain why this incident falls outside their jurisdiction. But what you are truly witnessing is not merely a single unfortunate night for one company. You are observing a critical stress test of the inherent fragility in America's ambitious path back to the moon. It is a test whose results have been inadvertently presented on a silver platter to a competing nation currently unburdened by such setbacks. The wreckage at LC-36 will be cleared. The pad will undoubtedly be rebuilt. Bezos will continue to fund the effort until New Glenn flies again. None of this is truly in question. What is in doubt is the ultimate cost, the months lost, the customers quietly redirecting their business to other providers, the satellites failing to meet crucial FCC deadlines, the lunar contracts being reshuffled to whoever can still deliver, and the quiet but profound question of whether investing $100 billion in pursuit of SpaceX can still yield a competitive company when a single catastrophic night can obliterate its entire launch capability. The fireball has dissipated, the smoke has cleared. What remains is the slow, costly, and arduous task of meticulously identifying what failed and why. It involves rebuilding what was lost and endeavoring to reassure all stakeholders that the next attempt will yield a different outcome. Spaceflight is unforgiving. It's a phrase frequently invoked, and it is profoundly true. What distinguishes a fireball at Cape Canaveral from one elsewhere is that it unfolds before the entire world, streamed live to millions in real time. There is no quiet failure here. There is only the public spectacle, and the public narrative of Thursday night will undoubtedly shadow Blue Origin for years to come. Jeff Bezos is correct on one point. It is worth it. Spaceflight has always been worth the immense effort. Every nation that has ever achieved orbit began by losing rockets, losing pads, losing engineers, and losing dreams. The history of humanity's journey beyond this planet is a chronicle etched in fire. Thursday night's events represent another page in that book, and a stark reminder: the path to the moon is not a paved road. It is constructed one rocket at a time, and every now and then, one of them disintegrates before our eyes. The only recourse is to start anew. Blue Origin will start over. They have no other option. The only question now is how long it will take.